everyone, welcome back. We are going to continue with the next part of this, which is carving the face. And just a quick look back at the book. This is how the face was carved in here, and you just kind of get a great idea of the general direction of how the face shape looks and how the features are sort of started. I think, there's always room for tweaking throughout this. Keeping in mind that the eyes are going to come out. It's just going to be a outline there for a while. But we're starting with a blank face that we previously made. It does have styrofoam inside, so it can be hollow. So the first thing is just to sketch everything out so you know where all the parts are. And then you're going to have to just start adding on clay and carving out areas to make the contours of the face. The first thing you want to remember is that the eyes are about halfway down the head. I know it seems weird. It may even look funny initially, but if you put them up too high, which is the tendency, then you're going to have alien head. So I always try to start out with the eyes in the middle. Doesn't always work that way for me, but hopefully, with the magic of this clay, you can change things along the way if you have to. So I'm just doing an outline of the eyes. This is really rough, guys. No artistic measures here. But I just want to know where everything's going to be positioned, because this is going to determine how we add clay pieces to this, eventually smoothing it out and sculpting so that we have something that hopefully will resemble a human face. I think faces are the hardest thing for me. I used to think it was hands, but now I don't think that anymore. I think it's faces, because there's just so much to it, and you have to keep looking at the front and the side, because you could have all the features positioned correctly, and then you look at it from the side, and the nose is sticking out too much, or the lips are sticking out, or the chin is sticking out, and it just gives it an inhuman look. So, or grotesque look, really, is what happens for me. So just keeping in mind that throughout this process, you have to keep looking at the front and the side. You have to keep looking at pictures or a previous doll. I have this other doll that I'm looking at that's a ball jointed doll. It's a little bit more stylized, not so much realistic, but it does give me some ideas and helps me with positioning of things. So I just want to get this rough layout, and then we're going to just start adding clay to build up the areas that we need to build up. Now, I'm using this sharp pointy tool to do an outline of the eyes. This is going to be important because you start adding clay and you cover things up. So we'll just start with this ball of clay. I'm going to hold it in the palm of my left hand to keep it moist, keep it away from the air, and I'll just take out little pieces as I need it. That's a little tip. So the first thing we're going to do is add some brow, and then some over the lip, some chin, and some cheekbones. And once we get all of those laid down, then we can do a little bit more detailed work. Always, you want to wet your clay, your dry clay, before you put wet clay on it, and that makes it stick and gives you a good adherence. So I'm starting out with putting just little globs over the eyes, and this will make the brow. Now, guys, the brows of humans go straight up from the overbrow. It doesn't slope, and this is something to keep in mind. The sloping is for our Neanderthal friends, our monkey friends. They have sloping foreheads. We humans typically do not, unless we're, different. Not to say it's a bad thing. I'm just saying, if you want to be artistic, you got to work on getting that forehead pretty much going straight up from the brow line. All right, we'll be working on that throughout. That's just part of the process. So right now I'm sticking some lips on. This will need lots of work. We have the nose. We're going to put a little bit on the chin to make the chin a little bit more prominent and stick out. But as you'll see in a minute when I show you the side of this other doll, there's really a drop off from the nose to the top lip, to the bottom lip, to the chin. It really angles back. And if you don't get that right, you're going to get a weird looking face. Now, throughout this process, you want to keep your slurry available. So you want to just keep it covered, keep adding water to your paste. You're going to use this constantly throughout this process. It's great for just dipping the brush in to get it wet and smooth out areas, and also to cover up little small dents or cracks in the clay that you have let dry. It's great to help smooth. So just keep it handy. I keep it in that little covered medicine cup. If I have to each day, I'll put a little spray of water on it to keep it moist. But it usually stays pretty well in there. Usually doesn't dry out that much at all. Kind of surprising. So just really going through this process. I'm going to, go pretty fast for you guys. I don't want to, this was a 3-hour combination of videos, but the process is, putting down clay, taking away clay that doesn't fit the shape, letting it dry, sand, do it, go back, do it again, look at the front, look at the back, look at the sides. It's just a constant process and doing it very slow. And it takes a long time because as you make these changes where you're adding clay, you really need to let it dry overnight, guys, unless you're just putting an incredibly thin layer of clay down. You'll see why in a minute when I show you all of the many mistakes I made because I didn't want to wait. So I have a tendency to come in and do some work, then go do my regular job as a nurse practitioner, working online, and then come back later in the afternoon and try to do some work. And then I make mistakes because it's not fully dry, even though it looks dry. So just keep in mind, it's a slow process. Try to take it slow. Don't get in a hurry. But fortunately, when you do make mistakes with this particular clay, it's pretty easy to fix. You just have to reattach parts you knocked off or whatever, and then let it dry again. So I'm adding more to the nose. I didn't think it was sticking out quite enough. Smoothing down the cheekbones. I had the cheekbones too high here. You'll see I had to carve those down eventually. It looks just a little bit too much like a ancient being. But hopefully at the end of this you'll see that it took a little bit better shape. So as you let this dry too, you want to do your sanding. You don't want to get out of the practice of doing that, because if you get too much clay put down without sanding, you can really get areas that when you do try to sand them, there's even still lumps under it. So I'm still using these nail buffing sanders for fingernails. These are really the best thing I've found to do this. I mean, you can use these 3M foam pads too, but they're very expensive because they're 3M. The nail sanding blocks are a lot less cheaper. And now let's take a look at this doll. So I was telling you about, if you look at the way it drops off, you have the nose being most prominent, then the top lip, then the bottom lip, then the chin. It all goes backwards towards the neck. You would think the chin would stick out more, but it really doesn't. So you really have to look at that. And it's nice to have a doll or an image that you can keep looking back at. And then you look at the side of your doll's face. It can look okay from the front, but if you don't have this side profile correct, it really isn't. It's never going to look right. It'll end up making it, even the front part, look wrong. The lips, the bottom lip, even though it's usually fuller than the top lip, it's not as wide. So you have to carve off a little bit of the sides of the bottom lip underneath the crease between the lips. And then the top lip has that shape where it has the Cupid's bow, where it comes in that sort of heart-shaped look under the nose. And then the actual crease can be a little bit different. That's one of the hardest things to do, I think, is that crease, because you kind of want to have that upper lip protrude down into the middle of the bottom lip. But once you put that clay down in a straight line, it's a little bit hard to do that. So sometimes I think using a straight pointy tool like this is better than the X-Acto, because you can just make a groove. It's not as sharp on the edge, so you're not carving away the sides of the lip, the top and the bottom of the lips. You're just carving into the clay to make that indention, and then you can maybe carve that in the shape that you want a little bit more. Than it shouldn't just be a straight line across. Then you just have a grim look for your doll. And also there's usually little indentions on the sides of the lip, a little hole, and that you can carve out with either X-Acto or with the pointy tool. Just knowing that with the X-Acto you have that tendency to slice off parts of the lip. As I work, I'm always looking at other parts, and I'll do some tweaking of sanding or carving of things that are protruding, trying to get that smooth look. And this is important for two reasons. One, you want to have that base. If you still, even if you're still adding, you want to have that base that's smooth. But also, it's not until it's smooth that you can really see your progress and see what the doll could look like. And then you know what further work that you need to do. At this point, I'm using that tool to make the philtrum, that ridge that goes down under the nose to the lips. Philtrum, did you know that word? Yeah, I'm using this tool because it's got a pointy tip, but it's not as sharp as an X-Acto, and it makes more of a ridge than a real sharp cut. So you make it a little deeper than you think you need to, and then you sand it off and it looks more natural. That's kind of the theory, or my theory anyway. All right, so here we are. We've let this dry overnight, and it's starting to take a little bit more human shape. You can see, I think I got the profile pretty good. I want to do a little bit more with the nose, the cheeks, and under the eyes. So first off, I just feel like the nose is not, the end of it is not sticking out enough. And also the little nostrils on the side are not sticking out enough. So I'm going to take a little piece of clay and just put across the end of the nose. And then that'll add to both the sides and the tip. And then I'm just using my tool here to smooth it out. You want to smooth it into the other clay on the sides. And that's tricky because you don't have a lot to work with here. And as you can see, I just knocked one of her nostrils off. But fortunately, I can push it back down. So just really need to go easy with your pressures. Otherwise, you knock things off that you don't mean to, especially with these little delicate features. Oh, this is a process. I'm showing you all the bad things as well as the good things, because I don't want you to make the same mistakes. So still, we're just contouring here. This metal tool is really awesome for this. Really is great for smoothing. But also you can use, your brush. You can wet it or you can use it dry, depending on the wetness or dryness of the clay that you're trying to smooth, and whether you're adding additional layers of clay or not. If you're just trying to smooth, sometimes you can just use it dry or just slightly damp. But just this brush is kind of a little bit stiff, and it's a nice shape because it's flat on the end. So it really helps to do shaping in a lot of areas and smoothing. And when you go around the curves, like the sides of the nostrils, you really need to have that sharp edge of the front of the brush to be able to stick it underneath that and smooth that out. So let's look at the side again. Let's look at the profile. Probably still need to do some tweaking. Chin is almost a little bit too big, like too long. I don't know. We'll do some sanding on that. I'm using that 3M sanding block now, sanding sponge. This is a real fine grain, and once I get kind of down to the shape overall that I want, I'm not trying to take off too much clay. This is a nice product to use to just smooth things out or take off very minimal layers of clay. So kind of the process is, The deeper you want to go, you use the knives, the tool, the X-Actos. If you want to go a little bit less, you use the nail sanding block, and the least is the 3M sanding foam. All right, here's where we are right now at this point. We're going to end up also in this video putting the joint on the body, but for now I'm just I want to get the head shape as close as I can before I start messing with that. I don't want to have to mess with the head a lot after I get to that point. Here's another boo-boo I made. I'm pressing so hard with that, trying to make a nostril, that I just broke the end of the nose off. And this was a situation where I had not let it dry completely. I had come back after several hours. It looked dry. It was not dry underneath. There was no strength to the clay. So here's where you want to have your slurry ready. Your paste. Go in with some thick paste underneath where you popped it off. Press it back down to reattach it. Sort of like glue at this point. And then you can use thinner amounts of the paste around, because you're going to have a little bit of a line, you know, where the crack was, and you don't want that to show. And this is great for that. Like, you'll go back and see places on the body or the head that you made like a little dent with your fingernail or something, you know, and you can just go in with that slurry and usually cover it up pretty well. All right, so this time I let it dry overnight. Now I'm just using a sharp X-Acto instead of pressing in really hard with that pointy tool and twisting it so that I don't break it again. Very delicate, that nose area, but you got to have the nostril. It's just an important look. You can't have a nose without two holes in it. How the girl gonna breathe, right? So yeah, keep that in mind. We're gonna continue to tweak here and do some carving, do some scraping. Cutting makes a deep cut, scraping makes a less deep cut. And also using, as you notice, both a carved blade X-Acto and a straight blade X-Acto. Making the eye marks a little bit deeper, because I think I'm going to have to do a little bit more work above and below that. And then eventually we'll just cut the eye, inside of the eye out, because we're going to be using glass eyes on this doll, so it will look more realistic eventually. Also, this is where I'm sort of carving down the cheekbone. I had a little bit too high, so that curved blade is great for that, because you're not making a straight across cut scrape, you're making a curved one, so it curves from the eyeball down to the cheek and not just, you know, scraping off the top. That makes it a lot more realistic, because usually we do have sort of that hollow look under our eyes until it gets to the cheek. It really doesn't go straight down to the curve of the cheek. Or if you're like me, you have dark circles under your eyes. So just still scraping here and sanding, keep looking, seeing if it's where you want it to be. Looking pretty good. Now at this point, I think I want to add a little bit more above the eye, a little bit more of an overhang over the lid of the eye to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm adding a glob of clay to both sides, and if you need to, you can, you know, if that sticks out too much and makes it look like too much of a sloping forehead, you can, you know, then add a little bit more to the forehead as well. It's a process. This part is more like just fine tuning. Like, you've got pretty much the shape. Everything's in a position where you want it. But now, just the more you can do to make it more realistic, the better. Our faces are not flat. We might draw them that way, but our faces have lots and lots of contours, lots of detail, and the more we can get that right on this clay, the more we'll have a realistic looking doll. But as I've said from the beginning of this project, I'm not trying to be too realistic, because it's just too much with all the new techniques and processes that I'm working on with this project, but I would like to get it semi-realistic. All right, so here's where we are at this point. A little bit more overhang to the eyebrow. So let's look at the doll and the body at this point. We have the neck of the body, and then we got a ball. Now remember, the elastic strings are going to go up through the neck to the head. So we have a hole in this bottom of this ball that we already had taken out previously. Eventually we'll have a hole in the top of the ball, but that's for another show. So we're going to be adding the ball onto the neck. So we're wetting that clay, the dried clay of the neck, and then I'm going to just roll out a log of clay here. I'm going to make a circle with that, put it on top of the hole of the neck, and then we'll set the ball down on top of it and smooth the clay around it to give it a nice, firm, secure hold. So eventually everything will connect up in the head. So this is a vital joint. Now the book says you can do either a ball joint on the neck and make the socket in the head, in the bottom of the head, or you could put the ball at the bottom of the head and make the socket in the top of the neck. But really, for simplicity's sake, and really because this other doll I have is like that, I'm going to put the ball on the neck and then set the head down on top of it. Also, this book shows the doll not having an opening head. It's got a process where you open the head, put it back together. Now with this doll, I'm now going to have to put on some ears. So the easiest way to do this and the best way to do this to get them even, because you won't believe how easy it is to have two different size ears and also two differently positioned ears. Roll out a ball nice and round, and then you squish it flat and then cut it in half. And that way you have two equal parts, and that's the easiest way to get the ears to be the same shape. Now you can still misshape them, once you put it on the doll, but it's just ensuring that the amount of clay that you have is the same and general shape is the same. And no, don't do this. Do not cut with an X-Acto into your finger. Put it down on a hard surface. Yeah, just cut it right in half. And it's also kind of an ear shape, after you cut it, that half moon shape. And you can round off those edges a little bit to make it look a little bit more like an earlobe. And then you're going to put a little bit of water down on the area to moisten that clay on the head where you're going to put it. Position it where the top of the ear is about on the level of the bottom of the eye and about in the middle of the head. This can get out of whack too. All right, then the front part of the ear smooths down into the side of the head more, whereas the back part of the ear sticks out more separately. So we kind of leave that separate looking. You want to attach it, and this is a good way to do it, using your water with your brush to attach, make sure that that's attached, otherwise it will have a tendency to pop off. So then we can position the ear on the other side of the head, do the same thing, smush it down, make a position, make it where it's even with where the other ear is. And then you can do more contouring after they're dry, but this is the crucial point: getting them in the same position, having them equal size, having it nicely contacted to the head. And then we will let it dry overnight. Yes, we will. Before we mess with it again. But you can see it looks pretty good. Yeah, you don't want to have ears sticking out too much, or they look like Opie from the Andy Griffith Show. After after the night when they're dry, then we'll do a little bit more of the interior carving. But the basic shape is there, looking good, happy with that position. I think this doll looks like a man right now, but we'll work on that. All right, so we let the ears dry overnight and we let the neck dry overnight. So at this point, I want to just take some time to try to make the ball at the top as round as possible. So I'm just measuring which of these templates I'm going to use. Then just stick the doll down, the head down into the neck ball down into some water for a little bit to just soften up the very top layer of the clay. Then you can just run it into that template, into the one that's almost the size but not quite, and rotate it around, and that makes it nice and round. And then we'll let that dry for a while. Okay, now we can work on carving the ears while we're letting that ball of the neck dry. Now for this, I'm just going to use this pointy metal tool because it's not as sharp as the X-Acto, and it's not sharp on the edges, it's just the point. And that means I can sort of carve but not slice off parts of the ear that I don't want to slice off. As you do this, you want to keep in mind, as I've said before, you want to just go deeper probably than you think you need to go, because you are going to have to sand this, because you don't want to have sharp edges of the grooves that you make. You want those to be rounded so it looks like flesh in an ear. So have a dry brush available because you do get a lot of residue and powder into those little cracks and you can't really see where you are. So as you do that, you're going to be going back and forth between sanding, carving, brushing out the dust, and maybe looking at pictures. Guys, everybody's ears are different. This is the nice thing about the shape of ears. You can't really do it wrong because everybody's ear shape is different, and even both of your ears are not the same exact shape. The thing that we all have though is that part that sticks out, the tragus, that sort of triangular part that sticks out from the cheek, and then there's usually a deep hole behind that. That's where the ear canal goes in. But other than that, up around the tops of the ears and that other part of the earlobe, those can be all very different. Everybody's very unique. But you try to get them similar. You don't want them to be completely different, but you want them to be somewhat similar. And after you have that done and they've dried and the neck is dry, then we can go back and do a little bit of sanding, because we added clay to this, so we have some roughness to the joint process that's unavoidable, but that's okay. We can go back, especially using that 3M sponge. Really nice to take off those rough parts. So now I'm going to just look at the doll's head and see what I need to carve out of the neck to make the socket. All right. We're going to have to carve it so that the opening is wider than the inside hole in the head. And that's because the joint will sit up in there and it'll be sort of curved like a bowl. And that will keep the neck from going completely into the head. Just keep that in mind. We're going to keep looking back at our template to see where we are with the roundness of the ball, and then we'll look at how we're going to carve that out. So initially, just to get it wide enough, you could carve it with the straight edge, but then you definitely want to switch over to that curved blade so you can get the shape that you want to have the outside of the hole bigger than the inside of the hole. And I'm using a metal ball tool there to just stick in there because it helps me visualize how round it is. And then I'm looking back to see, this has to sit down enough that it looks natural on the neck. You don't want the neck to be like a giraffe. Now, Here I'm just still opening it up. One thing to keep in mind, you do not want to carve too close to the chin. If you need to keep making it bigger, you need to make the opening wider at the back of the head, because you have to have that distance from the neck to the chin for it to look like a real person. So I'm going back and forth, looking at my doll, looking at the inside of the neck. Decided to take the styrofoam out of the head. Just starting to think about a few things. One is, I want to keep in mind that there's a lot of pressure on this joint. This is where all the elastic is going to come up into. So there will be some stress on this joint. Now, as I think about that, I think that I don't have enough thickness of clay at the base of the neck, at the base of the head. So I've decided to go ahead and cut the head open at this point, because I do want to have this doll be more like a real ball jointed doll, where you can open up the head, you can, if something happens to the stringing, you're able to get to the strings to change them. You can change out the eyes. It's just a better option for a doll that you want to keep for a while and make changes to. Also, I have this grandiose idea that I'm going to end up being able to make a mold of this doll so I could cast it in resin and make more than one. I know, I like to dream. Oh well, it might work, it might not. It just depends on how nice it looks. If it doesn't look nice, it's not worth it, because nobody would want a ugly doll. But if it looks really nice and I think I can, hey, it would be, first of all, fun to do, and a great project to film, so you guys could see how you could do that, because you can use the molding process that I would use to make the molds for the silicone for really anything, not just dolls. You can use it for any process. It's the same. You just maybe use a different type of silicone to mold it. All right, so I've got my line on where I want to saw, and you want to make sure that it's even, because you don't want it to be a crooked cut. And then we're just going to use our coping saw like we did for the other parts of the doll joints, and saw it right off. It makes a nice thin cut, and you want that because the head has to fit back together. Eventually we'll put magnets into parts of that joint of the head so that we can stick the head on and off. Alright, so this way we're able to look in there and get to the inside where that hole is, and basically just smoothing this out. Not really trying to do a lot of work here, because that will come later, but just smoothing it out enough so I see where I am. I also wanted to make a mark at the back so I can know exactly how to line the doll up in the future. I think this will be important, because as you do more work on things and add things, it may not look like it lines up exactly if you look at the bottom. So looking at the joint, it seems like I need to make it a whole lot deeper, and also that means I'm thinning out what clay is there. So I need to add some clay. I'm going to just have to add some clay to the bottom here. So just take a lump of clay, get a round ball, and then we're just going to press it down in there. Put some water down on your dry clay, remember, otherwise it's not going to stick well and it'll flake off. And then we'll just press this thick piece of clay down, and then use our metal tool and go around the edges and smooth it into the clay that's dry. You want to have a nice smooth look. I have a silicone tool I was using. It didn't really work, so I'm not going to tell you about that. It really works better with the wet brush. So again, using that slurry works well, or just wet the brush. Alright, you just want it to be nice and smooth, because eventually if we cast this, you don't want it to look rough. Again, looking at that joint to see how that head might fit up in there. Now we also would need to make a hole here. We don't want to make the hole later. We want to go ahead and make the hole. So I'm sticking my metal tool in there and then sort of wiggling it around. And that will make us a hole. Now I don't want to make it as big as the opening of the neck, because like I said, the upper part of this is what's going to hold the neck from pushing up into the head. So you got to have some strength. But all the stringing of the legs and the arms are all going to go up to the head and put pressure on this joint. So I think we really needed to add a layer of clay here for some strength. So that's what it looks like at this point. I did, of course, let it dry overnight. And that's where we are. I did actually end up going and carving out the eyes, because while I was using the tool to open them up more, one of them fell out. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go ahead and open them up. So sorry about that. I didn't get to show you that, but it was pretty easy. I just used the X-Acto to cut around the edge till I got it thin enough that they just popped out. I think the book shows you drilling holes in them, but I didn't feel the need to do that. So here you can see I'm using that curved blade. I'm going to just still keep looking at the length of the neck now to see if it fits up in the head. I'm getting to the point where I think it's fitting up into the head enough, but the neck is just still too long. So, looking at my other doll, and you can see how that doll's head's open too. I mean, it seems like it's almost the same length, but for some reason, it just is not looking right on my doll. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to cut off some of the neck. I don't want to cut off the ball and reattach a ball. I'm just going to cut off part of the neck, sand it down, and then reattach the little bit of the neck and ball to this. So I just carved it down some, sand it down some. I'm thinking it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, it just feels like it's a little bit too much neck. Looks a little bit weird. So you can put the ball back on it before you attach it. Make sure you have the right size. If you have to, you can always cut off a little bit more, which I had to do because I just felt like it still was a little bit too tall. And get it even with the X-Acto so it fits with the part that has the ball on it. And that's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to sand it down just a little bit more. Sand off the bottom of the ball. Make sure I have that nice and carved out while it's easy to get to. And take one more gander at it. And that's looking more like a real neck. I can always carve out the underside of the head a little bit more, but I think at this point I don't want to shorten the neck too much. So we're going to use the same process. We're just going to put some water on that dried clay, put a little bit of fresh clay down in a circle, set the ball with the other part of the neck down on top, and then smooth it out. So you can see, even if you make mistakes or if you start to think, you know, what you have doesn't look right, there are ways to fix it. Don't give up. You just, you know, can cut things off, reattach them. Or you can knock them off, like I do, and reattach them. But I think that's going to work a lot better. I think I could probably carve out this a little bit more too. And once you get it to where you think you want it to be, you can spray it with some water and then use that ball to really make it smooth and open it up a fractional amount more. But that's going to determine how well the head moves on the neck, is if that's a nice smooth joint. If you got that rough, it's going to make it so that the neck won't move smoothly. You won't be able to position the head. So guys, that's really about it for this video. That was a lot, I know. But we have the ball attached to the neck. We just have to do a little bit of tweaking with some sanding to get the groove back in the neck in the front that we had, and smooth down any excess clay that went down, you know, to make the attachment. We want to make sure that the head moves smoothly on the body, which seems to be doing pretty well. And, you know, making sure that you have the neck the length that you want. But I think at this point I'm pretty happy with it. I'm ready to move on. So next video we're going to be doing more engineering work on the joints themselves. This will be preparation for attaching everything together. So we have to get that lined up properly, but we'll be opening up the joints, getting ready to string this all together and see how it looks. And then we'll have the fun part of doing a little bit of cosmetics and that sort of thing. But hope you guys are still hanging in there and watching. I hope you're enjoying it. I appreciate it. Give me a like and subscribe. It does help my channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks and bye.